President, we have a national emergency.
This is one of the things that we can shoot first and ask questions later. Normally you can't do that.
All of a sudden these trees started moving out of the way. They parted for me. And then I came out into this opening, and there where I saw Jesus Christ.
Back in 1927, an American socialist, Norman Thomas, 6 times candidate for president on the Socialist Party ticket, said the American people would never vote for socialism. But he said under the name of liberalism, the American people will adopt every fragment of the socialist program. He is more imminent.
James Madison, 1788, speaking to the Virginia Convention, said, "Since the general civilization of mankind, I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachment of those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations."
When men were free.
Broadcasting live from a secret location buried deep below the earth, you're about to make a connection to the signs of the times. W. Dean Shook is live on the air right now.
Welcome into End Time News. I'm your humbled host, W. Dean Shook, bringing you the news the mainstream media is never going to touch, and I'm proud and privileged to be able to do that. Thank you for being here. You're all very important. Let me start off by saying thank you to our listeners on the iHeartRadio network. What a wonderful network this is. Also, our listeners on Blog Talk Radio Network and the Spreaker Radio Network. And, of course, welcome to our regular broadcast affiliates across this country. You're all vitally important to this program, and I appreciate all of you so very much. Now, I got to tell you, I was reading an article, and it was by Joshua Krause, and it made a lot of sense to me. It was about people who accept tyranny, and it really explains a lot more than that. I think it explains why people who receive welfare benefits, for example, seem to be so happy with it. You might say, well, they're not happy with it. Well, they say they're not, but they don't do much to get away from it. I think it also explains why people who are happy at their jobs and achieving, say, just middle management. It seems to be because they don't have to be responsible for some of the most important decisions that are being made. They take the attitude that it's not my call, so I'm not responsible. The people who receive state benefits have some of the most stressful decisions of life, like finances, made for them. They don't have to be accountable for that part of their lives. While, yes, it can be limited, but the limits are consistent, so they don't have to worry about that part of their lives. They know what the benefits are going to be, and they adjust accordingly. Now, it turns out this may explain why supporters of people like Barack Obama seem to support him no matter what he does. If he does something that makes them mad, they squeal a little bit, but they don't pull their support because he's taking a very stressful load off of their shoulders by making all of the important decisions for them. It's the path of least resistance. Why is Bernie Sanders, a self-proclaimed socialist, getting so much support? Because socialism promises the same thing. Less responsibility for anyone who's willing to accept some government rules and regulations. Again, there's a segment of our population that wants this path of least resistance. They're willing to accept the loss of some freedom for what they see as an easier life. It's easier because they don't have some important responsibilities. This may also be why a lot of people say, let the illegal workers come in and do the work for next to nothing, so the corporations can make more money. Then let the government raise corporate taxes. This is the mantra of paying their fair share to finance all of these benefit programs. Wealth redistribution. And some of them say, while you're at it, you can make my life easier if I don't have to show up for these pesky parent-teacher conferences. So please, educate my child, and you decide what they should learn. I don't want to have to teach them about sex or marriage. You should teach them that in school. And because you don't give me enough money to do all the things that I want to do, then you should also feed them through your free lunch program, even when there's no school. And also, pay my student loan for me, would you? And since I can't afford a phone, Would you give me a free phone and some rent assistance to go along with that electric bill assistance? I need all of that so I have time to go to the food bank right after I get my nails done. There's a large segment of our population that, while they won't admit it, this is the way they live their lives and they don't do anything to change it. Well, when I read this article by Joshua, it really made a lot of sense to me about why people accept tyranny. Here's what Joshua says. He says, we all know Americans descending into a police state. Many have wondered how it all came to this. The easiest answer to that question is that we let it happen. No matter how brutal a regime may be, tyrants never come to power unless they gain the approval or at least the indifference consent of the people. So the real question is, how come so many people seem absolutely complacent in the face of our crumbling cultural values and the steady march of tyranny? Even worse, how can so many people revel in it? It seems like the number of people who truly value freedom are severely outnumbered by idiots and power-tripping busybodies. Now, granted, the number of people who want to be free has grown in the recent years, but they're still few and far between when compared to the glut of the masses that we share the world with. And here's the answer to the awful question, and the dirty truth that most people can't bring themselves to admit to. Most people love freedom, but only as an idea. They like the idea that they can do whatever they want. They admire the rugged individualist, and everyone loves underdogs and rebels. In other words, people love the banners and the symbols of freedom, but do they love freedom in practice? I would argue that no, many of them don't. As strange as it may sound, most people really struggle with having freedom. Let me give an example. How about in the field of marketing? In the year 2000, 2 psychologists conducted a study on how the number of choices we have affects our behavior. They went to a supermarket. They displayed 24 different gourmet jams on a table. They provided a $1 coupon to see how much interest it gained. They did the same thing the next day, but instead of 24 jars of jam, there were only 6. Now, the large display attracted a lot of interest, but the small display got 10 times as many sales. So maybe you think the study is inconsequential, but I wouldn't blame you for thinking that. So let me share another case that will clarify this point. One of the psychologists who conducted the study did another study on the differences between end-of-life care in the United States and France. She interviewed patients in both countries who had children on life support. In France, the doctors make the decision as to whether or not a child is taken off of life support. In the United States, it's the parents' decision. Now, she talked to these parents a year after their children had died. The American parents were much more distraught over their decision to pull the plug. They still had nagging doubts about whether it was the right decision to make. They felt like they had executed their child. The French parents, on the other hand, didn't feel nearly as bad about the situation. They were well on their way to coping with the tragedy. And the point that's being made here is that most people don't like having choices. Despite how much they'll argue to the contrary, the more choices they're given, the more likely they are to not like the choice that they've made. There's much more doubt about whether or not the choice was correct, which leads to some pretty counterintuitive conclusions. You can measure how free you are by the number of choices you have. Most people claim to love freedom, but in a lot of cases, these people are happier when they have fewer or no choices. I think most people are simply happier without freedom, which is unfortunate and sad to say at the very least. This is why so many people accept tyranny, why it will always be a problem for the human race, because tyranny is so much easier than freedom. It's acquiescence. It means giving up. Tyranny is for quitters, and it amounts to handing over the reins to someone else. Most people are happier when they don't have a choice, and they don't even realize it. However, There's another way to look at this odd human behavior. There was another interesting fact that was gleaned from this study. The American parents who had chosen to take their sick children off of life support still regretted their decision. But when asked if they would have had it any other way, most of them claimed that they would have still made the same decision. Their decision made them unhappy. They knew it made them unhappy. But when they were asked if they would have rather let the doctor make the choice, they all said no. And the right there is an example of people who truly want freedom, not just the rosy idea of freedom. Those who truly want freedom are willing to accept the painful struggle of having a choice in life and prefer it to the ignorant bliss that comes with not having a choice. However, it was only applicable to that particular situation. Would those same parents prefer to have a choice in every other aspect of life? Unfortunately, the kind of person is a rare bird these days. If you could ask anyone in the world about their ethics and political beliefs, you'd probably find a wide variety. But most of them would have one thing in common. There's always some part of their lives that they're willing to relinquish to a higher authority. And that part differs depending on their ideology. Most people don't really want the full freedom package. So it's up to a rare few who really want freedom without compromise to make it a reality for themselves. The human race will always teeter on the edge of a tyrannical abyss because there's an inherent weakness in our species. We're happier when we don't have so many choices or freedom, which means that accepting tyranny is easy for us. It takes all of the strength and moral fiber to rise above it. Because we default toward tyranny, which is defined by the lack of choice in our lives, when we stop caring, it's our natural inclination, just as human weakness and apathy leads to ignorance, violence, and hatred. It also destroys freedom. The political and financial elitist of the world want you to give in to your weakness and fall back on those easier instincts. They want you to give up. They want you to yearn for a simple life, where your choices are taken care of by someone else. They want you to be a slave. But do you really want that? Do you have the strength to make that choice? But what happens when tyranny runs amok? You know, our world is a culture of violence and death. Tyranny also has an evil side. Things like genocide. How do we deal with people or countries who commit genocide? How did they deal with the Stalinist era in the USSR? That was 1929 to about 1953. Called for a mass execution and exile of what they called socially harmful elements as enemies of the people. Some estimates put it as high as 20 million. In 1953, before he could institute another purge of Jews and other enemies of the state, Stalin had made it onto the cover of Time magazine no fewer than 11 times. 11 times on the cover of Time magazine. How about in the Holocaust? How did Hitler rally all of these people to support him the way they did? These Nazis exterminated not only the Jews from continental Europe, but millions of others that it deemed undesirable. Some 11 million people, over half of them Jews, had died, either through mass extermination, deportation, or starvation, or overwork in those prison camps. This was all part of a brutal policy that much of the world either refused to believe or chose to ignore until the first camps were liberated by the Allies in the spring of 1945. This could serve as a warning that no country is immune from becoming a killing field under the right circumstances and with the right leader, as millions of Germans had to learn the hard way in World War II. Well, what about Mao Zedong? How do we deal with these people? He attempted agricultural modernization and social engineering. And social engineering was really his main point here. It led to mass starvation between 58 and 61. The death of many former landowners, while not specific efforts to eradicate a population, was made and genocidal in nature was the fact that Mao continued his policies long after they were obviously proven to be disastrous, thereby dooming millions of peasants to starvation. How about the Third Punic War? It's often considered the first historically recorded genocide in history. The forced repatriation of Cherokee Indians from Florida in 1830 resulted in the death of some 4,000 Indians out of 17,000 who made the trip during the famous Trail of Tears incident. How about Genghis Khan, known for wiping out entire nations in his quest to expand the empire? How do we deal with people like German General Lothar von Trotha, who wiped out some 100,000 native tribesmen in southwest Africa, that's modern Namibia, between 1904 and 1907, in what was considered the first organized state genocide? Saddam Hussein exterminating the Kurds during the 80s, which included using chemical agents against Kurdish towns. And you know, there's a lot more that we could go into here. These are just a few examples of the mass murders of innocent people. Is this because of tyranny? A result of tyranny? How do you deal with this? So what should you do with a nation that's killed more than 56 million of its own people and don't even feel bad about it? Why is the U.S. government giving hundreds of millions of dollars each year to an organization that murders hundreds of thousands of babies, harvests their organs, then sell them to medical researchers? I think everyone has seen this extremely disturbing video that was just released about a top Planned Parenthood executive coldly discussing the sale of aborted baby parts over lunch. But now that this has been revealed, will America do anything about it? The purchase and sale of human body parts is a felony according to federal law. The commercial trafficking of aborted baby parts is punishable by up to 10 years in prison and or a $500,000 fine. So will anything happen to Planned Parenthood and the executives involved in this illegal activity? Or will Planned Parenthood just continue to collect hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government, that's your tax dollars, every single year? I think we all know what the answer to that's going to be. It'll be yet another reason why America will deserve every ounce of the judgment that's about to hit this nation. And what will our leaders do? For now, they're promising to investigate and conduct hearings. Here's what Fox News said. Nothing is more precious than life, especially an unborn child. House Speaker John Boehner said in a statement, when anyone diminishes an unborn child, we're all hurt, irreversibly so. When an organization monetizes an unborn child, and with the cavalier attitude portrayed in this horrific video, we must all act. So what's he going to do? He said, as a start, I have asked our relevant committees to take a look into this matter. Oh, say it isn't so. You're going to have them look into the matter. Well, Boehner also urged President Obama to denounce and stop these gruesome practices. Well, what does President Obama say about it? Pro-life members of the House held a press conference Wednesday afternoon and likewise backed congressional hearings on the matter. Harsh. Already the House Energy and Commerce and Judiciary Committees have announced an investigation. Oh, wow. But will anything ever come from this? I think we all know the answer to that. Even though the blood of more than 56 million babies has drenched our soil, most Americans have quit caring about the issue of abortion a long time ago. That's why I say when judgment comes to America, we're going to deserve every bit of it. Let me share some stats that you may not be aware of. When you total up all forms of abortion, including those caused by the abortion drug RU-486, the grand total comes to more than 1 million abortions performed in the United States every single year. The number of American babies killed by abortion each year is roughly equal to the number of U.S. military deaths that have occurred in all wars in the United States have ever been involved in, combined. Approximately 3,000 Americans lost their lives as a result of the destruction of the World Trade Towers on 9/11. Every single day, more than 3,000 American babies are killed by abortion. About 1/3 of all American women have had an abortion by the age of 45. Almost 1/3. Approximately 47% of the women that get an abortion each year in the United States have also had a previous abortion. And it's been reported that a staggering 41% of all New York City pregnancies end in abortion. Most women that get abortions in the United States claim to be Christian. Protestant women get 42% of all abortions. Catholics get 27% of all abortions. About 18% of all abortions in the United States each year are performed on teenagers, some without their parents' knowledge. We're going to get into that in a little bit. One very shocking study found that 86% of all abortions are done for the sake of convenience. Planned Parenthood specifically targets the poor. A staggering 72% of all Planned Parenthood customers have incomes that are either equal to or beneath 150% of the federal poverty level. There are 30 Planned Parenthood executives that make more than $200,000 a year. A few of them actually make more than $300,000 a year. And Planned Parenthood gets more than $400 million from the federal government each year. Where does the federal government get their money? This is your tax dollar. Whether you agree with abortion or not, your money's going to Planned Parenthood. 78% of all abortions in New York City are performed on African Americans and Hispanic babies. 78%. According to Pastor Clenard Childress, approximately 52% of all African American pregnancies now end in abortion. Are you seeing a pattern there? Overall, there have been well over a billion with a B, abortions performed around the world since 1980. Now, you heard me quote Stalin had killed what he called harmful social elements. Hitler and the Nazis killed what they called undesirables. Mao did it for social engineering. So what was Margaret Sanger's motives? All of the above? Well, here's what Margaret Sanger wrote in the Birth Control Review in May of 1919. This was right about the time that she started the Negro Project in New York City. She said, more children from the fit, less from the unfit. This is the chief aim of birth control. Margaret Sanger wrote in the Control Review in 1921 that the purpose is promoting birth control was to create a race of thoroughbreds. Now, at this point, she was just using birth control. Abortion was not on the agenda yet. But what does Planned Parenthood say today? There's a Planned Parenthood advertisement from the Dallas Observer on January 30th, 1986 that said this: if your parents are stupid enough to deny you access to birth control and you're under 18, you can get it on your own. Call Planned Parenthood. And then again, a Planned Parenthood employee lecturing students of Roma High School in Riverside, California. This was April 21st and 22nd of 1986. Here's what they said. At Planned Parenthood, you can also get birth control without the consent or knowledge of your parents. If you're 14, 15, or 16, and you come to Planned Parenthood, we won't tell your parents you've been there. We swear we won't tell your parents. Wow. Well, there's a piece written by John Nolte who has revealed the racist pro-Nazi roots of Planned Parenthood. He said, led by a mainstream media in full emotion radical blackmail mode, we just had a national debate about the Confederate flag with the news that Planned Parenthood is trafficking in dead baby parts. News our mainstream media is somewhat downplaying. The time seems proper to examine the racist pro-Nazi roots of Planned Parenthood, an organization founded by vile racist Margaret Sanger, an organization that receives nearly $500 million every year of your hard-earned money. Sanger was a birth control proponent who founded Planned Parenthood nearly 70 years ago. Her motives had nothing to do with liberating women or women's rights. She was a eugenist, someone who believed that through abortion, birth control, and forced sterilization, could assist the human race in the elimination of the unfit. In a piece titled Birth Control and Radical Betterment, Sanger wrote in part this, and I'm quoting Margaret Sanger. Before eugenists and others who are laboring for radical betterment can succeed, they must first clear the way for birth control. Like the advocates of birth control, the eugenists, for instance, are seeking to assist the race toward the elimination of the unfit. Both are seeking a single end, but they lay emphasis upon different methods. Eugenicists emphasize the mating of healthy couples for the conscious purpose of producing healthy children. The sterilization of the unfit to prevent their populating the world with their kind, and they may perhaps agree with us on the contraception is a necessary measure among the masses of the workers, where wages don't keep pace with the growth of the family and its necessities in the way of food and clothing, housing, medical attention, education, and the like. She said, we who advocate birth control, on the other hand, lay our emphasis upon the stopping not only of the reproduction of the unfit, but upon stopping all reproduction when there is no economic means of support, proper care for those who are born in health. The eugenist also believes that a woman should bear as many healthy children as possible as a duty to the state. We hold that the world is already overpopulated. Eugenists imply or insist that a woman's first duty is to the state. We contend that her duty to herself is her duty to the state. Who were the unfit? Sanger laid it out in 1938 when she praised Nazi Germany's sterilization policies. The unfit included those suffering from feeble-mindedness, circular insanity, heredity epilepsy, heredity blindness or deafness, or grave heredity bodily deformities, and chronic alcoholism. She said, surely everyone will agree that the children of parents so afflicted are no contribution to the nation, for even if they do not inherit these defects, they're children of parents so handicapped that life will give them little, owing to them necessarily bad environment. There were 1,700 special courts, 27 higher courts in Germany to review the cases certified for sterilization there. She said the right of the individual could be equally well safeguarded here, but in no case should the rights of society on which he or she is a member be disregarded. Here are the unspeakable things that Sanger published about black people in an essay titled, What Every Single Girl Should Know. She said it's said that the Aboriginal Australian, the lowest known species of the human family, just a step higher than the chimpanzee in brain development, has so little sexual control that police authority alone prevents him from obtaining sexual satisfaction on the street. According to one writer, the rapist has just enough brain development to rise him above the animal, but like the animal, when in heat, knows no law except nature, which impels him to procreate whatever the result. Every normal man and woman has the power to control and direct his sexual impulse. Men and women who have it in control and use their brain cells in deep thinking are never sensual. Sanger's Planned Parenthood racist history, it's not a secret. For obvious political reasons, it's not widely reported by the same media that obsesses over the Confederate flag. Hillary Clinton's aware of Sanger's past. In fact, the Federalist noted today that in 2009, Clinton sang many praises about the racist pro-Nazi eugenists. Here's what Hillary Clinton said in an annual meeting of Planned Parenthood, where she received an award. This is not very good audio, but listen to this clip.
When I read this article by Joshua, it really made a lot of sense to me about
well, thank you
accept tyranny.
So much. It's great to be back in Houston with so many friends,
Many have wondered how
to have an opportunity
to
participate in
is that we let it happen.
The Planned Parenthood annual meeting.
May be,
I have to tell you that
never come to power unless they
it was a great privilege when I was told that I would receive this award. I admire Margaret Sanger enormously. Her courage, her tenacity, her vision. Another of my great friends, Ellen Chesler, is here, who wrote a magnificent biography of Margaret Sanger called Woman of Valor. And when I think about what she did all those years ago in Brooklyn, taking on archetypes, taking on attitudes and accusations flowing from all directions, I am really in awe of her. And there are a lot of lessons that we can learn from her life and from the cause she launched and fought for and sacrificed so greatly.
But far too many women are still denied critical access to reproductive health care and safe childbirth. All the laws we've passed don't count for much if they're not enforced. Rights have to exist in practice, not just on paper. Laws have to be backed up with resources and political will. And deep-seated cultural codes, religious beliefs, and structural biases have to be changed.
They displayed 24 different gourmet jams on a table. They provided a $1
as I have said,
to see how
and
much
as I believe, the advancement of the full participation of women and girls in every aspect of their societies is the great unfinished business of the 21st century. And not just for women, but for everyone. And not just in far-away countries, but right here in the United States.
So when she said, we think about what Sanger did all those years ago in Brooklyn, she's talking about the Negro Project. That's where it was initiated. The Federalist went on to say that Margaret Sanger, for those who are unaware, was a vile racist and eugenist who dedicated her life to ridding the world of poor black babies, who she deemed the degenerates and defectives. She was a featured guest at the Ku Klux Klan and a huge proponent of the forced sterilization program of the Nazi regime in the 1930s. While the Confederate flag is down, the taxpayer-funded Planned Parenthood still stands, primarily in black neighborhoods, just as its racist founder planned so many years ago. Now, I think it's interesting. No sooner did the House of Representatives pass a bill to protect babies from late-term abortions and ban them after 20 weeks, then Hillary Clinton fired off a statement slamming him for doing it. She said the bill was a direct challenge to Roe versus Wade, which has protected a woman's constitutional right to privacy for over 40 years. Then she said the bill puts women's health and rights at risk, undermines the role of doctors play in health care decision, burdens survivors of sexual assault, and is not based on sound science. And it also follows a dangerous trend that we're witnessing across the country in just the first 3 months of 2015. More than 300 bills have been introduced to the state legislature, she said. On top of the nearly 30 measures introduced in Congress that restricts access to abortion, she is clearly against any kind of restrictions on abortion. Never mind that doctors have indicated there's no medical reason for killing unborn babies in late-term abortions, and they're done on healthy babies for reasons of birth control. Hillary Clinton has a long history of pushing abortion, even on a global scale. Most recently, Hillary Clinton pushed abortion at a fundraising event in March, 1 year to date after she received this award from Planned Parenthood. Clinton said she admired Margaret Sanger, the racist founder of Planned Parenthood. Recently, she's even partnered with Bill Gates Foundation that supports abortion. The Gates Foundation, operated by Bill and Melinda Gates, supports abortion and the Planned Parenthood abortion business. President Obama feels the same. He knows the racist background of Planned Parenthood. Let me give you a small clip. Please listen to this clip.
People who truly want freedom, not just the rosy idea of freedom. Those who truly want freedom are willing to accept
In
the painful
1939,
struggle
Margaret
of
Sanger,
having a choice in
co-founder
life,
of Planned Parenthood,
and
started
prefer
the
it to
Negro
the
Project
ignorant bliss
with the
that
aim of
comes with not
slowing and
having
then
a choice.
reversing the growth of the
However,
black
it
population.
was only
A
applicable
staunch
to
advocate of
that
eugenics,
particular
the so-called
situation.
science of purifying the human
Would
being.
those same parents
Sanger viewed
prefer to
certain
have a
races,
choice in
especially
every
blacks,
other
as
aspect of
genetically
life?
inferior and
Unfortunately,
inclined
the kind
towards
of person is a
producing
rare bird
human
these
weakness.
days. If you could ask anyone in the world about their ethics and
human
political
beings who
beliefs,
never should have been born.
you'd probably find a wide variety.
Sanger's
But
strategy,
most of
still
them
followed
would
by
have
Planned
one thing
Parenthood
in
today,
common. There's
involved
always
recruiting
some
so-called
part of their lives
progressive
that they're
black
willing
leaders
to
who were
relinquish
persuaded
to a
that
higher
slowing
authority.
back birth
And that
rates
part
was a key
differs
to their
depending
people's
on their
future
ideology.
success and
Most
prosperity.
people don't really want
A profoundly
the full
disproportionate
freedom
number of
package.
abortion
So
clinics
it's
were
up to a
placed near
rare
the
few
inner
who
cities.
really want
And
freedom
since then,
without
an
compromise
equally
to
disproportionate
make it
number
a
of our
reality for
African American
themselves.
population,
The human race
more than
will always
15
teeter
million,
on the edge of
has
a
been weeded
tyrannical
out
abyss
by abortion.
because there's an inherent
On this
weakness
fundamental
in our
issue,
species.
I will
We're
not
happy
yield,
when we
and Planned
don't have
Parenthood
so many
will not
choices
yield.
for freedom,
Because we know that
which
what's at
means
stake is
that
more
accepting
than whether or
tyranny
not a
is
woman can
easy
choose an
for
abortion.
us.
Choices about
It takes
how
all of the strength
we
of
lead our
moral
lives.
fiber to rise above it.
As the
Because
most
we
pro-abortion
default toward
candidate in
tyranny,
American
which is
history,
defined by
Barack
the lack
Obama
of
will
choice
make
in our
sure
lives. When we
this
stop
bleeding
caring,
continues.
it's our natural inclination. Just as human
Say no to
weakness and
abortion.
apathy leads
Say
to
no to
ignorance,
black
violence,
genocide and the
hatred.
Negro Project.
It also destroys
Say no
freedom.
to Barack Obama.
The political and financial elitists of the world want you to give in to your weakness and fall back on those easier instincts. They want you to give up. They want you to.
All right, I'd like to
yearn for a
change
simple
gears
life,
here a little bit.
where
If you
your
don't
choices
mind,
are
we're going to
taken
move on
care
to
of
another
by
subject
someone
that's
else.
gay marriage
They want you
and
to be
how
controlled.
we
But
as
do you really
Christians
want that?
should respond to
You have
this.
the strength
And
to
some of you
make
may
that
not like
choice,
what I'm going to
but
have to
what
say
happens
here. Let
when
me make
tyranny
clear right
comes
up front, though, I am
No,
a
our
evangelical
world is
Christian.
culture
I
of
am a
violence
born-again
and
Bible
tyranny also
believer.
has an evil side.
And Christians say that
Things
gay
like
marriage breaks
genocide.
God's law
How
on
do we
marriage,
deal
but
with
this is
people
coming
or
from
countries
people who,
commit
in many
genocide?
cases,
How did
have
they deal with the
also
Stalinist
broken
era
God's
in
law
the
on
USSR?
marriage.
That was
67% of all Christians
called for a
say that
mass
they've had a divorce.
execution and exile
You know,
of what they
and it's no
called
wonder that so
socially
many
harmful
people
elements
refuse to
as
have anything to
enemies
do
of
with
the people.
Christianity.
Some
They
estimates
say, I don't
were
want
as
to be
high
a part
as
of a bunch
20
of Christian
million.
hypocrites.
In
And you know what?
1953, before he could
They're
institute
right.
another purge of Jews
How can
and
we,
other
as
enemies of the
Christians,
state,
chastise
Stalin had
someone,
made it under the cover
anyone,
of Time
for breaking
magazine
God's
more
law on
clearer
marriage
than
when
11
67%
times.
of Christians are
11
doing the
times
same
on
thing?
cover of Time
Marriage
magazine.
is the first
How about in the
institution
Holocaust?
created by
How
God.
did Hitler
God made the
rally
first
all of
man,
these people
Adam,
to support
but declared that it was not good for Adam to be alone. He then brought to Adam all of the animals which Adam named, but there was no companion suitable for him.
11 million people,
God
over
was
half of
revealing
their
to
genes
Adam
had died,
his incomplete
either through
nature.
mass extermination,
God then created
deportation,
woman,
or
Eve,
starvation,
for Adam.
or overwork
He
in those
blessed
prison
them,
camps.
according to Genesis
This was
1:27,
all part
and
of
their
a brutal
union gave
policy
them the earth
that
to
much of the
rule
world
over.
either refused to believe
The creation of
or
marriage
chose to
occurred
ignore
prior
until
to
the first
sin's
camps
entrance
were
into the
liberated
world.
by
It
the
was part of
Allies
God's
in the
perfect
spring of
design for
1945.
mankind. And through
This
his
could
prophets,
serve as a warning
God
that no
emphasized
country is immune
three
from
very
becoming
important
a
principles
killing
here.
field under
That
the
God
right
is sacred. God
circumstances
hates divorce.
and with the
In
right
Malachi
leader, as millions of Germans had to learn the
says
hard
marriage
way
is
in
designed to
World War
produce
II.
children
But what
of
about
good
Mao
character.
Zedong? How do we
In
deal
Matthew
with
19:6,
He attempted
Jesus
agricultural
underscored the importance
modernization
of
and
the sacredness
social
of a
engineering.
long life marriage
And
in his own
social
teachings.
engineering was really his main
In Ephesians
point here.
5:21-33, Paul taught the marital relationship is to be an ongoing demonstration of the sacrificial love that Christ showed his church. So let's look at this issue a little more closely. Specifically, what does the Bible tell us about divorce? You know, there's a lot of people who have got this divorce who have searched the scriptures for loopholes. And they make it very clear that they're going to spiritualize and cherry pick until they find a loophole that's going to allow them to divorce. Let's see what the Bible says about it. Malachi 2:13 gives us a clear look at God's heart for marriage. You fled the Lord's altar with tears. You weep and wail because he no longer pays attention to your offerings or accepts them with pleasure from your hands. So you ask, why? Is it because the Lord is acting as the witness between you and the wife of your youth? Because you have broken faith with her? Because she is your partner, the wife of your marriage covenant? Has not the Lord made them one? In flesh and spirit they are his. And why one? Because he was seeking godly offspring. He said, so guard yourself in your spirit. Do not break faith with the wife of your youth. I hate divorce, saith the Lord God of Israel. Jesus reiterated this in Matthew 19. He said some Pharisees came to test him. They asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? The answer was, haven't you read that at the beginning the Creator made the male and female, he said. For this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate. Why then, they asked, did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? Jesus said, Moses permitted you to divorce your wife because your hearts were hard, but it was not this way from the beginning. I tell you, and I'm quoting the words of Jesus, I tell you, anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another woman commits adulteries. So are there loopholes to this? A loophole is the question. Is adultery a state or an act? If it's the act, then when we remarry, confess the sin, continue living together, free from sin? Well, Romans 7:3 says, she shall be called an adulteress, which indicates a continuous action. The first marriage is still binding, which makes the second marriage adulterous. It must be confessed as in sin and forsaken in order for one to be restored to a right relationship with God. There are teachers who say a second marriage can be blessed. I want you to listen to this clip and see if you can hear how this guy contradicts himself. Please listen to this clip.
Marriage after divorce. I understand it doesn't apply to the non-believer. However, I've recently heard that it's not biblical to remarry after separated unless it is with the same person. So, if you are a Christian and you are married to a non-believer and things get bad and end in divorce, are you now unable to marry again?
Okay. Also urged President
First,
Obama
the question
to
says, I understand it does not apply to the non-believer. That, I think I understand what they're saying, but I don't want to confuse. It does apply to the non-believer. Divorce and remarriage is biblically wrong.
Already the House Energy and Commerce and Judiciary Committees have announced an investigation.
I want to read to you a passage in Matthew chapter 19, verse 9.
I think we all know
this is Jesus speaking. He says, and I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another commits adultery. And whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery. Just because you may be a believer and you're married to a non-believer, nowhere in Scripture does God give us the right at that time to divorce because they're a non-believer and you're a believer. In fact, it actually takes it quite the step in the opposite direction. It actually says that you should try to hold fast because you are a believer, you actually sanctify the person who you're married to. That means that God literally, there's something there that God has singled them out, that God is going to use you to make you one yoke, to make you both believers. So there's nothing in the Bible that says just because you have become a believer that you are a believer and your spouse isn't, that you have the right to just divorce and to move on. Let's say that you are both a believer. Let's start with this. Let's say that the couple was married and they weren't believers, they got a divorce, and they remarried, and then they became believers in Jesus Christ and are saved. Okay? Nowhere in the Bible does it say that at that point that person should try to go back and rectify their old marriage by breaking up their current one. That would be silly to do that. why you can't make one divorce right by having a second.
And it's been reported.
Does that make sense?
Now you heard him say right in the beginning of this clip the same thing that Jesus said. Anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another woman commits adultery. Yet in this clip he said, but do you commit another sin by divorcing your second wife and commit another sin, or do you get a do-over? Do you get a mulligan? For those of you who play golf, you know what a mulligan is? It's a do-over. Does that mean you can continue in your second marriage and be right with God, that He will bless that? No, it is still an adulterous relationship according to His words. There is no loophole there. He clearly says, I tell you, anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another woman commits adultery. If you're in a second marriage, whether you're a believer or not, well, in fact, let's get to this. Can God forgive your sin? Some people say that His grace and His mercy will forgive that first sin, and that's true, He will. But what did Jesus say to the woman who was caught in adultery? This is in John 8:1 through 11, where Jesus returned to the Mount of Olives. But early the next morning, He was back again at the temple. A crowd soon gathered. He sat down and taught them. As He was speaking, the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. They put her in front of the crowd and said, Teacher, they said to Jesus, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses says to stone her. What do you say? They were trying to trap Him into saying something they could use against Him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote in the dust with His finger. They kept demanding an answer. Soon He stood up again and said, all right, but let the one who is without sin throw the first stone. Then stooped down again and wrote in the dust. Then the accusers heard this. They slipped away one by one, beginning with the oldest, until only Jesus was left in the middle of the crowd with the woman. Then Jesus stood up again and said to the woman, where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you? She said, no, Lord. And Jesus said, neither do I. Go and sin no more. Sin no more. He didn't say go and continue to commit adultery. He said sin no more. Stop it. When you continue in your second marriage, you're in an adulterous relationship and committing that same sin again. God's not going to bless you living in a sinful relationship. There is no loophole there. If you're a Christian and you're in a second marriage and you're living that way, guess what? You're breaking God's law. The same thing you're accusing the homosexuals and the lesbians and the transgenders, and this is why they come to you and say, we don't want to be a part of any religion, especially Christianity, when you're just a bunch of hypocrites. And when you go to them, when you're divorced and in a second or sometimes a third marriage, then you're being a hypocrite. And it's the worst kind of hypocrite. You're a self-righteous hypocrite. That's the most distasteful kind of hypocrite. A third excuse people use is the pre-Christian mix-up. Now, in this situation, a person's been married and divorced one or several times before becoming a Christian. Humanly speaking, we may be inclined to say that there's no need to break up another home. We may think that because other marriages were not Christian that they don't count. Yet Jesus recognized several non-Christian marriages. It says in John 4:16 through 18, when He spoke to the Samaritan woman, Jesus said unto her, Go, call thy husband and come hither. The woman answered and said, I have no husband. Jesus said unto her, Thou hast said well that you have no husband, for you hast had 5 husbands, and him whom thou now hast is not thy husband. And in that sayest thou truly. John the Baptist told Herod, who was not a Christian, that it was wrong for him to marry his brother's wife. In both God's eyes and John's, the second marriage was sin. Herod was living in adultery. Marriage is not a Christian institution. God instituted marriage in the Garden of Eden before the plan of salvation was ever accomplished. Another objection is the word whosoever, as used in Matthew 19. This word is not just speaking of Christians. Here's what it says in 1 Corinthians, that we're to remain in the same situation that we were in when we were called to be a Christian. But these people fail to realize the verses in between are not referring to the marriage but circumcision of servanthood. Now you can go read 1 Corinthians 7:17 through 20 and see what I mean. So we might ask, what about the innocent victim? What about the husband or wife who decides to leave and the other really tries to work things out, but it just doesn't work? First of all, there's hardly ever a case where the blame rests completely on one person. Let's be realistic about this. But even if that were the case, marriage is so sacred in the eyes of God that there are still no exceptions. To remarry while your spouse is living is adultery. Some will say, well, what about children? But how was it in the time of Ezra? It specifically mentions children in that story. Children become the innocent sufferers. Every adulterous marriage and relationship can only add to the heartache and the bewilderment of the child. God's law of purity and holiness must be given supremacy. But we realize that God is the Father of fatherless and widows. He will bless and look after those children whose parents are truly obeying Him. What about returning to the first marriage after the divorce? Well, it makes it clear in the Bible that if one partner or the other has been with someone else and they are defiled, you cannot return to them. But it says in Corinthians 7:11, but if she departs, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. Yes, there's a place for reconciliation after leaving your spouse. However, if you've been divorced and remarried, you need to consider the scriptures in Deuteronomy 24:4. It says her former husband, which sent her away, may not take her again to be his wife after she is defiled. She had remarried another man and was sent away again. For that is an abomination before the Lord. True, this is speaking of the Israelites in the Old Testament of divorce and marriage. However, it's an abomination before the Lord. It was then and it is now. An abomination is something morally disgusting. We should not want to do something that's morally disgusting to God. Let's remember what Jesus said. If you're saying you don't want to leave your second family, you don't want to leave your second wife or husband, you don't want to break up the family, well, let's remember what Jesus said in John 14. If you love me, keep my commandments. Keep His commandment on marriage. And if you're going to speak out about homosexual marriages, make sure that you're not one of these self-righteous hypocrites that's also breaking God's laws. Here's the bottom line. How can we accuse others of breaking God's law of marriage if we're doing the same? I totally agree that there are other issues tearing down the traditions of marriage in this country, the breakdown of family. All of these are huge issues. But let's deal with them from a right perspective, not by breaking the same laws ourselves or being hypocrites about it. All right, I'm going to take a short break here. When I come back, we're going to talk about Donald Trump. We're going to talk about how he's affecting the conversation. And I'm going to bring you some news stories about how this immigration is affecting everyone around the world. I'll come right back after this short break. You're listening to End Time News.
Do you think the media is biased? Maybe they're leaving something out, or there's something they're not telling you. Now, you have a source for the truth in the news. W. Dean Shook, End Time News. Your connection to the signs of the times.
GoDaddy offers everything you need to make a name for yourself on the web, from domain names and website builders to complete e-commerce solutions. We've earned our place as the world's #1 accredited domain registrar by delivering world-class products at competitive prices and support them with industry-best services delivered 24/7, 365. We're proud to serve our customers from locations around the world. Sign up now at wdeanshook.com and get your domain name as low as $5.99 a year. Sign up now at wdeanshook.com. Go, Daddy. Go, Daddy.
Everybody, gather round. I'm here to give you anything you like. You want free college, energy, mortgages, whatever you like. You have come to the right place. Why? I'll tell you why. Who can take your money? Who can take your money? With a twinkle in their eye. A twinkle in their eye. Take it all away and give it to some other guy. The government.
The government.
The government can.
The government can.
And who can tax the sunrise?
Who can tax the sunrise?
Who can tax the trees?
Who can tax the trees?
Let you run a business and collect up all the fees. The government.
The government.
Oh, the government can.
The government can.
And the government can, 'cause they mix it up with lies and make it all taste good.
Make it all taste good.
The government takes everything we make to pay for all of their solutions. Healthcare, climate change, pollution. Throw away the Constitution. And who can give a bailout?
Who can give a bailout?
Tell us to behave.
Tell us to behave.
And make the founding fathers roll over in the grave. The government.
The government.
Oh, the government can.
The government can.
And the government can, 'cause they mix it up with lies and make it all taste good.
Make it all taste good.
The government takes everything we make. They're power hungry and malicious. Their economics are fictitious. Soon we'll have to eat our dishes.
Delicious.
Oh, who can be a failure?
Who can be a failure?
In so many ways.
In so many ways.
And instead of getting fired, hey, we'll give ourselves a raise. The government.
The government.
Oh, the government can.
The government can.
And the government can, 'cause they mix it up with lies and make it all taste good.
Make it all taste good.
And your Uncle Sam can, 'cause he mixes it with lies and makes it all taste good.
Makes it all taste good.
And I feel so good, 'cause the government says I should.
We are living in unprecedented times. Constant wars worldwide, nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom. They're genetically modifying our food, increased violence as the heart of man grows cold, ever-increasingly tyrannical governments around the world. Stay connected. End-time prophecy news with W. Dean Shook. Your connection to the signs of the times.
Thank you very much for that break. I appreciate that very, very much. You know, I watched all of the Sunday shows, and I seen the old guard on all of these Sunday shows, these ancient politicians, career politicians, who are talking the same trash that they talk every election cycle, saying the same things, putting down the other parties, blathering about all kinds of stuff that has no truth in it. And I thought, these people are really trying to protect the old guard, trying to protect the old process of career politicians. Donald Trump has really changed that conversation. They're saying he can't win because he doesn't have what career politicians have. He doesn't have handlers. He doesn't have all of these people behind him to tell him what to do, how to stand, where to walk, what to say. You know, America is not what it used to be. Things are changing, and these politicians are not changing with it. Now, whether or not Donald Trump has a chance of becoming president, he's definitely changing the conversation. And yes, he says some inflammatory things at times, like he did about John McCain. And it looks like some GOP candidates are seeing some value in telling the truth. Trump's surge in the poll continues because why? He's the only candidate who's willing to tell the truth, and he doesn't care what anybody thinks. Not that what he said about John McCain was true. I watched Face the Nation, and I seen them come on Face the Nation to prove Donald Trump wrong on immigration. And they did that by pulling up stats from 2012 and stood there and said that in 2012, in a study done on immigrants who had come into this country who were underage, the crime rate had not increased. So Donald Trump is wrong. Out of the 11 million, there is no increase in crime. Well, it's been 11 million ever since Barack Obama took office. We know that that's not the number now. That was the first lie. And then to quote stats of underage people that came in 2012 as a statistic for crime, I couldn't believe he did that. And then had the audacity to actually say that the number of people crossing our border illegally today is 0. He claims it's 0. Bold-faced lies. You know, it's no wonder that these people are purging viewers. You know, I almost felt so bad I was going to offer to hold their hair back while they vomit their viewers. Just incredible lies. I couldn't believe it. So it looks like some of these candidates are seeing the value of telling the truth. Trump's calling. He's not pandering to the political correctness. Let's look at some of the stories, and I'll try to put this in perspective. Trump is calling for more Christian immigration. WND is reporting Donald Trump might not appear to be the knight in shining armor that attracts Christian voters in the crowded 2016 Republican primary, but at first glance, at least, there's something in those steely blue eyes and mop of blonde hair. With all his worldly success and making money, he could make him the warrior of the right. Well, how is that? Trump started rising in the polls after making the comment that Mexico is not sending their best to America, that among those coming in illegally are a high percentage of rapists, murderers, and other violent felons. But that's not all Trump is saying. He's also speaking up for Syrian persecuted Christians. Though you won't read about it in the mainstream media, Trump has been making repeated comments about persecuted Christians in Syria and the difficulty they have in coming to the West as refugees or asylum seekers. At a speech in Las Vegas last weekend, Trump said those persecuted for their Christian faith by Muslims in Syria ought to be brought to America. And if he were president, he'd make sure they got a one-way ticket to a safe haven. That's here in America. He's leading the polls in the Republican pack as of July 17th, according to a Fox News poll. A lot of the consideration of the establishment media and those in his own party, his rise to 18% support among GOP primary voters is now ahead of second-place Scott Walker with 15%. And you know that Obama is just privately having a hissy fit because Trump is bringing up immigration and telling the truth on it, completely contradicting and exposing the lies of the government and Obama and Hillary. Here's a bit of what he said in his speech in Las Vegas.
Conservative Christians, real quick, Mr. Trump, are concerned about the deterioration of this culture. They're concerned about the marriage issue. What is your message to them on religious liberty, on religious freedom? What are your thoughts about that, and what is your message to them specifically?
Well, it's a very big message. First of all, as you know, I'm Protestant. I'm Presbyterian. Right. Most people don't know that. They have no idea. And I'm proud of it, but I'm very proud of it. But, you know, one of the things I learned this weekend, and being with I've met with a lot of national security experts and everything else, that if you're a Christian living in Syria, you can't come into this country. And yet, if you're a Muslim living in Syria who are not under attack, they can come in. But we have Christians being beheaded all over the world by ISIS, in Syria and Iraq in particular, and those Christians can't come into this country. So you say what you want. I mean, this is really something. And that's a lack of respect for us. If you're a Muslim, you can come into the country very easy. If you're from Europe and you're a Muslim, you can come in. But if you're from Europe and you're a Christian, you can't come in, meaning it's almost impossible. So you tell me about religious liberty and freedom. The Christians are being treated horribly because we have nobody to represent the Christians. Believe me, if I run and I win, I will be the greatest representative of the Christians that they've had in a long time.
Now, besides being an advocate of persecuted Christians trying to bring more to the U.S., Trump has also gone on the record as a pro-life and pro-gun candidate. On the issue of marriage, Trump told openly gay MSNBC host Thomas Roberts in November of 2013 that he was evolving on the issue, but remained committed to traditional one-man, one-woman marriage. He said, I think really what you have is a very changing stance, and you see it changing very rapidly. If you go back 10 years or so, it's very different. I think I'm evolving, is what he said. I think I'm a very fair person, but I've been for traditional marriage. I'm for traditional marriage. I am for a marriage between a man and a woman, he told Roberts. Trump is also playing up his plans to beef up the military, unlike President Obama. the Iowa National Security Summit on May 18th, about a month before Trump declared his candidacy, he presented his idea on the military, immigration, and trade. He said, "Did you know ISIS opened a hotel the other day? They're opening hotels. Can you believe this? And they're getting the money from the oil. Then we have a guy like Bush. He's a very nice guy, I think, but couldn't even answer the question about Iraq," Trump said. I'm going to post this story on the website. I think it's worth a read. So who is it that's finally seeing the light, that sees that there's some merit to actually telling the truth? What a strange concept for a politician. Well, the headline of the exclusive from WND says Rand Paul from Tennessee says to restrict immigration from Muslim nations. Oh, Obama's got to hate that. Breitbart News, an exclusive interview here, says that he wants to restrict immigration from predominantly Muslim countries after the Chattanooga, Tennessee terrorist attack. Rand Paul said in an interview backstage at a rally for his presidential campaign is holding inside the Hyatt Regency in downtown Houston, said, "I'm very concerned about immigration to this country from countries that have hotbeds of jihadism and hotbeds of Islamism." There was a program in place that Bush had put in place. It stood for Entry-Exit Program for about 25 different countries with a lot of Islamic radicals. Frankly, I think there does need to be heightened scrutiny. Nobody has a right to come to America. This isn't something that we can say or their rights are being violated. It's a privilege to come to America. We need to thoroughly screen those who are coming. He also told Breitbart News about another similar incident regarding foreigners from the Middle East who were placed in Kentucky via immigration program for refugees. Muslim refugees, no Christians allowed. He said, "In my hometown of Bowling Green, Kentucky, we had 2 Iraqi refugees who were led into our country who were plotting to buy Stinger missiles a few years ago. They got arrested and put in jail. But I think we're doing the wrong thing by just having this open-door policy to bring these people in without scrutiny. I'm for increasing scrutiny on people who come on student visas from the 25 countries that have significant jihadism. Also, any kind of permanent visa or green cards, we need to be very careful. I don't think we're being careful enough with who we let in." Sean Hannity asked Rand Paul why he thinks Trump is doing so well in the polls. Here's what he said.
Now, what do you make of the emergence of Donald Trump to the top of the polls?
I think there's a hunger among people who will tell it like it is, someone who's not a career politician. And it's really a fact that's also propelled us to do very well in national polling because, I'm a physician, a career politician is not what I am. But I've been a physician my whole career and bring an outsider's perspective and also understand now how horribly broken the system is and why we need term limits, why we need rules that say they have to read the bills. But I think there is a hunger for somebody other than many of the politicians just won't ever say anything. They talk on both sides of every issue, and their success is really in standing for nothing. And so I think people are startled when they finally hear someone who actually has a strong opinion.
And Jeff Sessions is now starting to speak the truth. He said we need less immigration, more assimilation. Said we should not admit people in larger numbers than we can reasonably expect to vet, assimilate, and absorb into our schools, communities, and labor markets. It's not compassionate or uncaring to bring in so many people that are not enough jobs for them or the people already here. As Coolidge said, we want to keep wages and living conditions good for everyone who's here or may come here. Over the last 4 decades, immigration levels have quadrupled. The Census Bureau projects that we will add another 14 million immigrants over the next decade. It's not mainstream, but extreme. He continued, surging immigrants beyond a historical precedent, said it's time for moderation to prevail and for us to focus on improving the jobs, wages, and security of the 300 million already living inside our borders. There's other countries who are fed up with the Islamization of their countries, and this is out of Australia. According to RT, anti-Islamic and anti-racial protesters clashed in Melbourne, getting pepper sprayed by the police. Now listen to this. And I'm still baffled why they call Islam a race. Islam is not a race. It's a religion. I guess racism is the new buzzword that applies to whatever they want it to apply to. Because they say if you're against Islam, you're not just Islamophobic. You're a racist. I don't know how, but you're a racist. Here's the story. Police in the city of Melbourne used pepper spray to break up scuffles between nationalist supporters from the Reclaim Australia movement, protesting against the Islamization of Australia, and the participants of an anti-racist counter-rally. The Reclaim Australia lobby is holding rallies in numerous cities across the country, which are predicted to attract thousands of supporters, including members of the nationalist movement. The events are also being attended by those opposing the marches who deem them to be racists. In Melbourne, the Reclaim Australia supporters managed to gather around 200 members of the Patriot Defence League, who gathered near Parliament House. However, they were vastly outnumbered by around 3,000 anti-racism demonstrators from the No Room for Racism group. Police reported clashes between the two groups. They had to use pepper spray to try and quell the demonstrations from both sides. Officers added that some people needed medical attention. A heavy police presence across the country prevented the protests from spiraling out of control. So let's see if we've got this right. If you believe, like Reclaim Australia says, they want English to be the country's primary language, have the right to celebrate national traditions and, in particular, Christian holidays, also calling for so-called traitors who betray the country's values to be deported, you're labeled a far-right group that's attempting to essentially build a far-right neo-Nazi movement on the back of racism and Islamophobia of the government. Wow. Far-right. Is that what the world has become? That what's good is evil and what's evil is good? Well, here in America, there's an exploding Muslim immigration, and it's overwhelming the FBI. This is a story reported by WND in spite of Face the Nation saying that immigration is zero. The FBI failed to stop another terror attack, this time in Chattanooga. The pressure building on the Bureau from the president's reckless immigration policy may be reaching a boiling point, according to security experts. And the problem goes far beyond a loose border where some 400,000 illegal aliens enter each year. It's also the ease from which some from hostile Middle Eastern countries can get a visa. Under current U.S. immigration policy, an ISIS terrorist doesn't need to hop a fence or swim a river to reach America. He can enter the U.S. legally as a student, or as a skilled guest worker, or a refugee if you're Muslim, as an entrepreneur or a tourist, and fly here in the comfort of a jumbo jet. According to U.S. Census data, the U.S. welcomes about 100,000 Muslim immigrants legally each year. This represents the fastest growing segment of immigration coming to America. While some may enter with questionable backgrounds, the chances are greater they will get radicalized after they arrive. Take the case of the Chattanooga terrorist. He arrives at his parents from Kuwait in 1996 at the age of 6. He attends U.S. school. By all accounts, he was a fully assimilated U.S. natural citizen. He was a success story just waiting to be told by Obama's newly created White House Task Force on New Americans, which calibrates which community-organized groups like Welcoming America to convince Americans that expansive immigration brings only good things to their cities and towns. But something happened over the last 2 years. At the age of 23, this terrorist traveled to Jordan and Yemen for 7 months. When he returned home, he grew his beard out, started writing a Muslim blog where he had made philosophical statements that could easily be interpreted as anti-Western. His father was investigated for questionable donations to an Islamic charity a few years ago and placed on a watch list. FBI Director James Conley's dire warning to Congress several weeks before the attack seemed prophetic because it applied perfectly to young Muslims just like this guy. The message of ISIS to Western recruits is this: come to the so-called caliphate, and if you can't, kill somebody. Kill somebody where you are. And Conley warned Congress about this. Middle East analyst Claire Lopez said he told them, with obvious deep concern that his agency is simply incapable of managing the threats now proliferating across the entire country, said Claire Lopez, Vice President and Research of Analysis for the Center for Security Policy and a former CIA analyst. Even there, Comley was holding back on what he must know is the reality of this situation. We've been living among us some percentage of a subset of Muslims who may be legal or illegal immigrants, refugees, or, like this Chattanooga terrorist, a nationalized American citizen who feel zero alliance to this country and instead identify above all of the global Islamic mullahs. And with the U.S. so liberally moving more Muslims into the country, about 800 new refugees a month come to this country from Somalia, arguably the most jihadist-rich country in the world, there's no telling how many have been radicalized or are in the process of being radicalized. Said we have no idea there are hundreds, thousands, or hundreds of thousands across America today who decide to pledge their allegiance instead to the Sharia doctrine of jihad. And where do they go to feed on the poison of Islamic jihadism? Family influence, Muslim Brotherhood-dominated mosques, Islamic centers for online indoctrination play some role, Lopez said. But neither Comley nor the FBI nor local law enforcement currently has the legal or investigative tools to identify and stop these individuals before they take the next step. So is it a far-right or a neo-Nazi racist movement to protect yourself or your family or to protect the sovereignty of your country, the values and principle that made our country great? Is it too much to ask that our government tell us the truth, to stop the lies and deception, the scams and the deceit, to stop the destruction of our economy and jobs? There's questions for you to ponder. Thank you for being here, and as usual, when the dust settles and the smoke clears, I'll be back with more Truth in the News. I am W. Dean Shook. Thank you.
You can get these full stories and more at wdeanshook.com. That's wdeanshook.com.